It was a chilly October evening when a group of friends decided to explore the grounds of Sloss furnaces. They were intrigued by the stories of paranormal activity and couldn't resist the opportunity to experience it for themselves. They parked their car in the lot and walked towards the towering blast furnaces, feeling a sense of unease as they approached. As they explored the area, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustling leaf and creaking metal beam made them jump. Suddenly, they heard a faint voice in the distance. It sounded like a man's voice, yelling something indiscernible. They followed the sound until they reached the blast furnace where Slag had met his demise. Standing in front of the furnace, they felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The voice grew louder and more distinct. It was definitely a man's voice, but the words were now clear. "Bet back to work," the voice shouted. The group was terrified, but they couldn't help but feel curious. They wanted to know more about this ghostly presence. As they walked around the furnace, they noticed a strange glow emanating from the furnace's opening. They cautiously approached it, and to their horror, they saw a figure standing inside. It was a man, but he wasn't alive. He was completely engulfed in flames, yet he didn't seem to be in pain. Instead, he looked calm and serene, almost as if he was at peace. The group tried to run, but their feet seemed to be stuck to the ground. The flames started to spread, and they could feel the intense heat on their faces. They were trapped, and they knew they were going to die. Suddenly, the flames disappeared, and they were able to move again. They ran back to their car, shaking and scared out of their minds. They didn't know what had just happened, but they knew they never wanted to go back to Sloss furnaces again. As they drove away, they saw a sign that they hadn't noticed before. It read, "Warning, do not enter after sunset." They realized too late that they had broken that rule, and they had paid the price. They all agreed that they had experienced something truly terrifying, something that they would never forget. Years later, one of the friends returned to Sloss furnaces, determined to face their fears. As they walked around the furnace, they heard a voice whisper, "I am sorry." They turned around and saw the figure of a man. It was Slag, the foreman who had caused so much death and destruction. He looked at the friend with tears in his eyes and said, "I never meant for any of this to happen. Please forgive me." The friend was stunned, but they realized that Slag was just as much a victim as the workers who had lost their lives. They forgave him, and in that moment, Slag disappeared, his ghostly presence finally at peace. From that day on, the friend made it their mission to spread the word about the tragic history of Sloss furnaces and to honor the lives of those who had died there. They knew that it was a place of horror and pain, but it was also a place of healing and forgiveness. It had been years since anyone had explored the dark, eerie halls of Sloss furnaces. People still talked about the strange occurrences and unexplainable deaths that had taken place there, and most were too scared to go near it. But one day, a group of urban explorers decided to brave the rumors and venture inside. They walked through the abandoned factory, their flashlights illuminating the rusty machinery and creaky floors. It was silent except for the echoes of their footsteps and the distant sound of dripping water. They had heard stories about workers mysteriously falling to their deaths, and they were on the lookout for anything out of the ordinary. As they walked up a flight of stairs, they suddenly heard a loud thud. It sounded like something heavy had fallen from above. They froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. After a moment, they cautiously continued up the stairs, their eyes scanning the dark corners of the room. That's when they saw a body lying on the ground, completely still. They approached it, but it was too dark to see who it was. As they shined their flashlights on the figure, they saw that it was a man in a hard hat and overalls, just like the workers who used to work there. They looked up to see where he might have fallen from and saw a gaping hole in the ceiling, with pieces of metal scattered around it. It was clear that the man had fallen from a great height, but they couldn't understand how it had happened. There was no one else around, and the group couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, one of them noticed a strange symbol etched onto the wall nearby. It was a pentagram, surrounded by cryptic words and symbols. The group had heard of satanic rituals taking place in abandoned buildings, and they couldn't help but wonder if that's what had caused the man's death. As they walked around the factory, they found more symbols etched onto the walls and machinery. It was clear that someone had been there recently, performing some kind of ritual. The group was terrified, but they knew they had to find out what had happened. As they continued their investigation, they found more bodies, all with the same strange markings on their skin. It was as if they had been sacrificed in some kind of dark ritual. The group knew they had to get out of there before they became the next victims. As they ran through the dark, maze-like corridors, they heard footsteps behind them. They turned to see a group of people dressed in black, holding knives and chanting in an unknown language. They knew they had to fight for their lives. The group of explorers managed to fight off their attackers, but they knew they had to get help. They ran out of the factory, their hearts pounding and their bodies covered in sweat. They called the police, and soon a team of officers arrived to investigate the scene. What they found was beyond their worst nightmares. The bodies of the workers had been mutilated, their skin covered in strange markings and symbols. The officers couldn't understand what had happened, but they knew it was something evil. The case was never solved, and the factory was closed down for good. People still talk about the strange occurrences and mysterious deaths that took place there. Some say it's haunted by the ghosts of the workers who died there, while others believe it's a gateway to the underworld. No one knows for sure what happened at Sloss Furnaces, but one thing is certain: it's a place of horror and mystery that will never be forgotten. Years had passed since the terrifying discovery at Sloss Furnaces, but the memory of the horrors that had taken place there still lingered. The factory was closed and abandoned, left to decay in the shadows of its own gruesome past. But as the years went by, a new rumor began to circulate. People claimed that the factory was once again inhabited, but not by the living. They said that the ghosts of the workers who had died there still roamed the halls, their tortured souls unable to find rest. It was said that at night, you could hear the clanging of metal and the sound of machinery grinding against itself. Some claimed to have seen the apparitions of the dead workers, their faces twisted in agony as they relived their final moments. Others swore that they had been followed by a presence, a malevolent force that seemed to be watching their every move. The air around the factory was thick with an otherworldly energy, and those who dared to approach it felt an overwhelming sense of dread. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the factory. They had heard the rumors, but they didn't believe in ghosts. They saw it as a challenge, a way to prove their bravery to one another. As they approached the factory, they felt an eerie chill run down their spines. The factory loomed before them, a hulking mass of rusted metal and crumbling brick. They made their way inside, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they walked through the factory, they felt the weight of the past bearing down on them. They saw the spots where workers had fallen to their deaths, the machines that had malfunctioned and caused unspeakable accidents. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they reached the top of the factory, they had a sound that made their blood run cold. It was the sound of footsteps, echoing through the halls. But these were not the footsteps of their own group, they were coming from somewhere else. They cautiously followed the sound, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they turned a corner, they saw a figure in the distance, shrouded in darkness. They called out, but the figure did not respond. As they approached the figure, they saw that it was a man in a hard hat and overalls, just like the workers who had died there. But he was not alone. Around him were the ghostly apparitions of the other workers, their faces twisted in agony. The teenagers tried to run, but they found that they were trapped. The ghostly workers surrounded them, their spectral hands reaching out to grab them. They were trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the horrors that had taken place in the factory. They saw the faces of the dead workers, twisted in anger and pain. They felt the weight of their sins, the guilt of what they had done. They realized that the factory was not haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by their own darkest fears and regrets. As they stumbled out of the factory, they knew that they had been changed forever. They had been forced to confront the horrors that lay buried deep within their own psyches, and they could never forget the things they had seen. The factory still stands, a monument to the terrors of the past. The ghosts of the dead workers still haunt its halls, their tortured souls unable to find peace. And those who dare to enter its doors still feel the weight of their own sins, the guilt of what they have done. Sloss furnaces will always be a place of horror, a reminder of the darkness that lies within us all. And for those who dare to venture inside, there can be no escape from the nightmares that await. Years had passed since the group of teenagers had entered Sloss furnaces, and they had all gone their separate ways. But the experience had left an indelible mark on each of them, and they had all carried it with them through the years. One of the teenagers, a man named James, had never been able to shake the feeling that he had left something behind in the factory. It was as if a part of him had become trapped there, unable to escape the horrors that he had witnessed. He found himself returning to the factory again and again, drawn to it by an inexplicable force. He would wander the halls, his heart pounding in his chest, searching for something that he could never quite name. As time went by, James began to notice that the factory was changing. It was as if the ghosts of the dead workers were becoming more active. Their presence felt more strongly with each passing day. He began to see things, apparitions of the workers, their faces twisted in agony. He heard their screams, echoing through the halls. He felt their hands reaching out to him, pulling him towards the darkness. But James couldn't stay away. He was drawn to the factory, as if it held the key to his own salvation. He spent hours there, searching for answers, but he found only more questions. One day, as he was wandering the halls, he saw a figure in the distance. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. She looked like she was from another time, another era. As James approached her, he saw that she was crying. He asked her what was wrong, but she didn't respond. She just looked at him with haunted eyes, as if she was seeing something that he couldn't. James followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. She led him to a room at the top of the factory, a room that he had never seen before. Inside, he saw something that made his blood run cold. It was a room full of mirrors, stretching as far as the eye could see. But these were not ordinary mirrors. They showed him images of his own life, distorted and twisted. He saw himself as a child, playing with his friends. He saw himself as a teenager, sneaking out of the house at night. He saw himself as an adult, struggling to find his place in the world. But the images were wrong, somehow. They were twisted, distorted, showing him things that he didn't remember. And in each one, he saw a figure in the background, a figure that he couldn't quite make out. As he moved closer to the mirrors, he saw that the figure was him. But it was a version of him that he didn't recognize, a version that was twisted and dark, filled with hate and anger. He tried to turn away, but he couldn't. The mirrors held him in their grip, showing him the darkest parts of himself. He saw the sins that he had committed, the things that he had done wrong. And he realized that he could never escape the darkness that lay within him. As he stumbled out of the room, he saw the woman again. This time, she was smiling. She took his hand and led him out of the factory, towards the light. But as they reached the door, James heard a voice behind him. It was the voice of Slag Wormwood, the cruel foreman who had caused so much pain and suffering. "Welcome to your new home," Slag said, his voice echoing through the halls. James turned to run, but it was too late. The factory had claimed him, just as it had claimed so many others before him. And as he felt himself being pulled into the darkness, he realized that he had never really understood the true nature of Sloss furnaces. It wasn't just a haunted factory or a place of dark history. It was something else entirely. As he was dragged deeper into the darkness, James saw things that he couldn't explain. He saw visions of other dimensions, of worlds beyond his own. He saw creatures that defied description and felt the weight of ancient powers beyond his understanding. He realized that the factory was a gateway, a portal to something much larger and much more terrifying. It was a place where the walls between worlds were thin, and the horrors that lay beyond were always waiting to break through. James struggled to break free, but it was useless. The factory had claimed him, body and soul. He felt himself being pulled into the depths of the furnace, the heat and flames licking at his skin. As he burned, he saw a figure emerge from the darkness. It was Slag Wormwood, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were dozens of other figures, the ghosts of the workers who had died at the factory. They were all smiling, welcoming James into their world. He realized that they were all trapped there, unable to move on to the next world. And now, he was trapped there with them. As the flames consumed him, James felt something stir within him. It was a power, a force that he had never felt before. It was dark and terrible, but it was also exhilarating. He realized that he could use this power to break free, to escape the furnace and the horrors that lay beyond. He concentrated, focusing his will and his energy. And with a burst of energy, he broke free. He felt himself soaring through the air, out of the furnace and into the night sky. He looked back at Sloss furnaces, watching as it receded into the distance. He knew that he could never go back there, but he also knew that the factory would always be a part of him. As he flew through the darkness, he felt the power within him growing stronger. He realized that he was now part of something larger, something beyond his understanding. And he knew that he would spend the rest of his life exploring the mysteries of the universe, seeking out the secrets that lay beyond the boundaries of his own world. The end.